Welcome to meeting number 38 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February 4th, 2021. The committee is resuming its study on the environmental contribution of agriculture. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the
Monsieur le Président.
House of Commons website. So you are aware.
Pardon, oui. Monsieur le Président.
Oui.
Mr. Chair, we're not hearing the interpreters.
J'imagine que c'est ce que Monsieur Lehoux voulait signifier également. Il y avait une main levée aussi.
Oh, OK. Oh, je regardais sur ma feuille, je ne regardais pas trop l'écran. Madame la greffière, est-ce qu'on a un problème avec la traduction?
Madam Clerk, do we have a problem with interpreters?
Vérifier ce qui se passe avec la traduction.
This is the English interpretation.
L'interprète est sur le canal français. Est-ce que vous entendez l'interprétation?
Est-ce qu'on entend?
This is the English channel. Testing 1, 2, 3. English channel.
Do you get the translation, Monsieur Perron? No.
Monsieur le Président, si vous voulez peut-être
Mr. Chair, could you suspend the meeting for a few minutes while we solve this issue? Yes, we will suspend.
We fixed the glitch in translation, so we'll just suspend for now. And I'll pick up, I think you know the drill, but I'll pick up about halfway. Je vais continuer à peu près à moitié si c'est correct avec vous. Vous connaissez pas mal les lignes, là.
So I will continue.
Opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photo of your screen is not permitted. Pour garantir le bon déroulement de la réunion, j'aimerais...
I would like to share some rules. Before speaking, wait for me to say your name. If you're on a video conference, click on the microphone to deactivate the mute. Participants' microphones in the room will be controlled by technicians in the room. I remind you that all MPs and witnesses' observations should go through the chair. If you don't have the floor, please put your microphone on mute.
Just before we go to our witness, I just want to remind our members that the deadline for sending amendments with regard to Bill C-205 is Friday, June 11th. So this coming Friday at noon, so 12 o'clock. Amendment must be sent to the clerk. And also, if you want advice on the admissibility of those amendments, you may contact the legislative clerk, Jacques Maziad. If you need assistance for drafting amendments, you may contact the legislative counsel, Alexandra Scora. So I don't know if there's any questions on that, but just wanted to remind all of you. And with that, I will now welcome our witness. So today we have with Alice, I believe it's Alternative Land Use Services. We have Mr. Brian Gilvesy, Chief Executive Officer. Welcome, Mr. Gilvesy. And also from Farmers Edge, Inc., we have Wade Barnes, Chief Executive Officer, and Bruce Ringrose, Head of Sustainability and Stakeholder Relations. Welcome to both of you. And we'll go with a 7.5-minute opening statement. And Mr. Gilvesy, it's yours for up to 7.5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Gilvesy.
Thank you very much, and for the opportunity to be here today. I'm a veteran farmer from here in Norfolk County, Ontario, and I also serve as an executive in residence at the Ivy Business School. But most importantly, today I come here as the CEO of Alice. I should mention, to contextualize my position in Alice, that I was the third participant farmer in this program back in 2006. And I've grown up with this program through my community to the point where I now run it. ALICE stands for Alternative Land Use Services. The ALICE concept was born in 2008 in Manitoba farm country as the Farmers Conservation Plan. The acronym simply means a farmer shall use his land in an alternate way and produce a service, an ecosystem service that we believe has market value. ALICE has since grown into 6 provinces and more than 30 communities. ALICE is a Canadian charity that works with rural partners like counties, conservation authorities, watershed districts, and other NGOs to help farmers and ranchers across Canada restore and enhance their nature on their farmland, or in fact modify how the land is farmed. It's important to realize that the biggest distinction of ALICE is a single one. In every community where we operate, we establish a partnership advisory committee made up of 50% of farmers and other community leaders to adjudicate the program within their local area. This has become the secret sauce to delivering a robust farm environmental program that's growing rapidly across the country. There is no doubt that Canada's farmers are on the front lines of climate change. Changing seasons and severe weather are all affecting the production of food and farmers' livelihoods. ALICE farmers and ranchers are fighting back against climate change. They are providing nature-based climate solutions that benefit all Canadians. Our wetland, grassland, sustainable grazing, and tree projects all lower greenhouse gas emissions and sequester carbon, along with a host of other benefits like the creation of new wildlife habitat, including for species at risk and pollinators, retaining and slowing stormwater to protect local and downstream communities, and improving air and water quality. Our organization is lucky to work with many researchers across Canada who are helping us better understand the impacts from our farmers' projects. What our farmers see and what our researchers are now documenting is how quickly they get results. When projects are properly planned and managed, the benefits accrue quickly. After 1 year, our restoration projects can have the diversity and abundance of pollinators and species that eat crop pests equal to an undisturbed area. And better yet, we know from our research partners that converting land that isn't economic for farming back to nature helps farmers produce more food, even with less land due to the extra pollination and crop protection that nature provides. Researchers are also helping us identify the most promising areas for climate and water outcomes, ensuring dollars go as far as possible. All evidence is pointing in one direction, that investing in nature through farmers is a smart strategy given the returns our communities receive. Turning the tide on climate change requires all hands on deck, or in this case, farmers who can put their hands in the dirt to make a difference. Since 2015, our program has grown to now include 31 community partnerships in 6 provinces, including the participation to date of over 1,100 farmers impacting over 125 square kilometers of land. As an organization, we have grown to deliver financial support to farmers, first from our humble beginnings under the umbrella of Delta Waterfowl Foundation. Then we became independent as a West End Family Initiative, and now are funded by over 30 partners. Of note, Alice has taken great care to find market value for farmers' work, as evidenced by support from corporations such as Cargill, A&W, Danone, RBC, and TD. Obviously, we have learned many lessons over the years I'd like to share with you today as the committee contemplates what the Government of Canada could implement in collaboration with producers to recognize the important role agriculture plays in this area. Firstly, to be effective, programming must create value at the farm gate and not be seen as a temporary incentive program. These are not subsidies or incentives. We want to reward farmers for producing the ecosystem services that can solve the world's most pressing problems. Second, acknowledging the creativity, skills, and experience of the people on the land to manage nature-based solutions result in powerful grassroots solutions, the likes we have not seen before. The PAC process has proven that working through community collaboratives provides leverage and allows for local solutions that can help communities adapt to a changing climate. Next point, it's not only about carbon. To maximize the real value farmers can produce with their nature-based solutions, we need to recognize all the value they produce, including biodiversity, water quality, and climate resilience. Next, support, extension, and technical advice through community contact is essential. Our farmers consistently mention this as a key to the success. Important to remember that the average age of a farmer is, in my ballpark, around 56 years old, where these things are not necessarily familiar to us. And having the support of a community-based program and the technical advice is really, really important to bring us into this fold. Second last, a marketplace for ecosystem services emerging before our eyes, and Alice is a leader developing this space through the New Acre project. Corporations will look to this marketplace for solutions for their ESG reporting and other objectives. It is essential we leverage these private dollars with public initiative for maximum effect. Look, it's the biggest point I want to make here is that farmers need flexibility to fully engage in conservation programming. So flexible approaches toward carbon sequestration are essential. We need to develop and approve carbon offset quantification and credit issuance protocols that are very different from what we have seen to date, but reflect the wishes of the farming community and the realities of farming. Putting farmers in the lead to provide environmental solutions is not only proven at Alice, but highly effective. I thank you for your time today and stand ready for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbisi. And now with the Farmer's Edge, you have up to 7.5 minutes between the two of you. Go ahead.
Great. Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me here today. My name is Wade Barnes, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Farmer's Edge. Farmer's Edge is a technology company that operates in the majority of the key exporting nations in agriculture. We were founded here in Manitoba. We operate just in Canada alone on 9 million acres. And we go out and we connect farms. We help those farms move through digitalization. We provide analytics and help them make key decisions on their farms. And some of the byproduct of that is carbon offsets and sustainability. The other part of what I do is I'm a farmer. I'm born and raised on the family farm in Manitoba, right along the Saskatchewan border, on the right side of the border to cheer for the right and winning football team, mind you. So no offense to any of the folks from Saskatchewan on the line. And I'm also a trained agronomist, worked in the industry for close to 20 years. So we have a unique perspective on how agriculture and sustainability will play out, that we view it that there is really 4 key initiatives that we want to drive home. And the first one is collaboration. There does not need to be a difference between economic development and the environment. As most farmers know, it is good business to be environmentally sustainable. And I think that the majority of farms that we operate with in Canada, and we operate in Ontario and Western Canada, not yet Quebec, but hopefully in the future, that most of these farms are doing the right things to essentially create sustainability. They have a natural attachment to this land, and they have a real focus, though, around productivity. And so some of the things that we hear from, an agronomic standpoint that concerns us is the view around a reduction in nitrogen. And I can tell you that a lot of the things that Farmers Edge does from a company's perspective is the ability to enhance farmers' use of crop inputs and specifically around nitrogen. And our view is that if government goes in and reduces the amount of nitrogen that is used on the farm, you'll essentially reduce productivity. And if I use my own example as a farmer on my own farm, if we reduce nitrogen by 30%, you'll reduce my productivity by 25%, which will really end up costing me on my canola that I grow somewhere around $225 an acre. And if you multiply that across 20 million acres of canola, it's a huge amount of revenue that'll be pulled out of the farming community. Now, I think from my agronomic side, my concern is that a reduction of nitrogen may not give the reduction in nitrous oxide that people may be looking for. And that's the concern. I think we have a significant opportunity to enhance and help farmers move towards sustainable practices like the 4R program. And this really enables sort of not a give on productivity. You can have your cake and eat it too. You can have maximum productivity with essentially the most environmentally sound applications of crop inputs out there in the marketplace. Now, some of the ways that we can move towards this, and from a Farmer's Edge perspective, is that I think Canada has a unique opportunity. And you have to remember that I've worked in many markets around the world, but Canada has a unique opportunity to be a powerhouse in digital agriculture. They have an opportunity to connect farms and utilize technology to be a world leader. And with that'll enable farms to utilize technology to go out and implement tools like the 4R program to create much more sustainability on those farms, which will create significant opportunities beyond just producing grains, but actually have that ability to connect with that end consumer, which is, I think, really, really important and could be a unique opportunity. With that, if we think about as farms, if we can enhance farms and motivate them to move towards adoption of technology, there's a huge opportunity around the creation of offsets. And today on Farmer's Edge, on our 9 million acres that we work with, we'll create over 3 to 4 million offsets, whether it be through nitrogen management or no tillage or cover crops. And we'll be utilizing those offsets and selling them on the voluntary market. So our view is that there's a huge opportunity here to create value beyond just growing grains for as a commodity, but essentialize utilizing the tools that we have to create offsets and allow Canada to be a powerhouse in sustainability. With that, as farmers implement technology, the ability to create carbon offsets on the farms creates significant opportunities downstream. When you think about the majority of food companies now are looking at their own zero emissions goals, and many of them are looking to source low carbon grain. And again, the Canadian farmer can be a world leader in that. And we have that opportunity to capture that value and capture it now. And the other thing that I wanted to touch on, when you think about utilizing carbon offsets to create value to the growers so that they invest in technology, it creates a much broader ecosystem. And so when you think about government's role in risk management and how the government funds risk management, how they help support lending programs, when you think about when you implement technology, it allows farmers to go out and create opportunities where they can get better insurance products, better risk management, better lending opportunities. And it starts to take some of the risk off government and put that towards private industry, because private industry can go out and utilize the data that farmers are creating and essentially provide those better management practices. So right now, what we see in Canada, but specifically Western Canada, where most of our customers are, there's a lot of concern around government coming in with environmental restrictions. But we see it as an opportunity. Again, done in the right way, farmers can create significant value out of these offsets. And by utilizing technology and digitalizing agriculture, can then allow for better risk management, crop insurance, and lending. So with that, again, I want to leave the fact that I think Canada has a tremendous opportunity here if done in the right way, and a collaborative approach, both with industry, the farmers, and with government. And I'm excited to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barnes. And before we go to the question round, I would like perhaps Mr. Gilvesy, there was an issue with your sound, and the interpreters were able to translate because they had your notes. But what was suggested is perhaps if you turn off your camera, not that we don't want to see you, but if you turn off your camera, all the energy will be hopefully will limit the poor sound quality. So we'll try that, and hopefully it'll work. So with that, we'll go to our first question round, and we have 6 minutes, and we'll start with Mr. Epp. Go ahead, Mr. Epp, for 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your excellent testimony, and also thank you, Mr. Chair, and to my colleague, Richard. There are no brooms in your background right now that I see, so I will extend congratulations to your cheering, and with that, we will carry on. Let me start with Mr. Gilvesy, even though I can't see you now. It is good to see you again. I believe it was just the end of my tenure on the Agri-Corps board that Agri-Corps was the adjudication body as Alice got off the ground. So it's good to see you again. In the materials that you forwarded to us, I lifted one quote from it, and you said, or Alice said, conservation will ultimately boil down to rewarding the private landowner who conserves the public interest, Aldo Leopold. Can you comment further? Many, many changes have been made at the farm level. You've outlined some there. I'm familiar with many. Can you talk about, agriculture has not been necessarily credited with those. So what do you mean exactly by that statement?
Aldo Leopold was a great figure to follow because he recognized the stewardship role. Our program was started by, the idea was from Ian Wishart, who was a potato farmer in Manitoba at the time and now sits as the environment minister of Manitoba. But his notion was, look, the farm can be a multifunctional place, and that the farm can produce more than just food and fiber. And it doesn't need to be at the exclusion of the food and fiber, but that ecosystem services that are valuable to all Canadians, including biodiversity and at-risk species and wetlands, are worth rewarding. That if we don't look to the ag community and reward them for this, and we will miss the biggest opportunity in Canada. All of Southern Canada, where we live, work, and play, is managed and maintained by farmers. If we want to maximize the quality of our life and what we get from those farms, we need to look at them differently and consider rewarding them for the extra things that they produce over and above the food and fiber. I think that's where that comment comes from.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Farmers Edge to weigh in on the same thing. I'll lift one quote from your materials. Net gains in sequestered carbon have gone unrecognized for 20 years. It represents an untapped opportunity for millions, et cetera, et cetera. Can you make comments along the similar vein?
Yeah, I mean, look, on those 9 million acres we operate on, the majority of those farms are either using no-till technology today, or variable application of fertilizer, or specifically placing fertilizer in the right spots. So they are making a huge contribution right now. Now, a lot of this is due to the fact that it's good business to implement these type of technologies. It saves the soil, it saves moisture, placing nitrogen in the right spots. You don't want to waste money, and so that you essentially create higher productivity. So there doesn't have to be a win-lose when it comes to the farm and the environment. I think what needs to go forward is how farmers are rewarded for this, and also to enhance them to invest more into this, to actually go further, and what other things can they do to find more efficiencies when it comes to potentially drying grain or better efficiencies with farm equipment.
Thank you. We recently heard testimony here at committee from the National Farmers Union that really warned us about, the farming community. I still lump myself in there because I'm part of a farm at home. To be careful of how embedded we come with multinationals, how embedded we come with data. It'd be oversimplification to say that they were advocating a return to a simpler form of agriculture, but they were very wary of, digitizing and becoming very wedded to large multinationals. Can you comment, please?
Is that directed towards me, sir?
Yes, please.
Yes. I mean, look, I'm a farmer, and I'm also the CEO now of a publicly traded company. And so the way that we look at data and information is similar to what my grandfather would have looked at of oil. If the oil stays in the ground, you can't create value out of it. Data is no different on the farm. We want to utilize data in an effective manner so farmers can make decisions on it. And we've been able to prove that when farmers have the right information, the use of crop inputs will go down. So I would say that I would say that being afraid of digitalization would be a giant step backwards in the farming community.
Thank you. Canada's track record, as testified to us by AFC officials, is that greenhouse gas emissions from ag have remained steady since 2005, despite production increases. If carbon taxes were further exempted as being proposed under Bill C-206 from grain drying and things like that, would you expect greenhouse gas emissions to continue to increase all of a sudden? Or what would you expect that happens over time, given the adaptation of the 4Rs and things like that? Again, to Farmer's Edge, please.
Yeah. My view would be is that I think greenhouse gases, based on farmers that are utilizing the 4R approach, I don't think they'll go up. I think that there is the more efficiency that you can create, the less that you'll see an increase of greenhouse gases. Now, I think technology will only enhance this in other aspects of the farm. We can, rather than just focusing on nitrogen application or fuel use.
Thank you. I'd like to get one more question, if I can, to Mr. Gavesi. What would the Ellis's position be on cross-compliance between BRM programming and environmental initiatives?
One of the things that farmers have told us in the design of our program is that we need to be voluntary. And that means that we operate in the space that is neither a regulatory one nor a legal one. Our farmers' actions are operating in an additional nature. In other words, they're providing environmental services over and above what any regulation or compliance might require.
Thank you, Mr. Gavesi. We have to move on to the next questioner. And thank you, Mr. Epp. And now, Mr. Blois, for 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for their testimony here today. And the big takeaway, I guess, as a member of this committee of what I've heard is that there's a huge power in looking at the natural solutions that are offered and the work that farmers can continue in this space and of course, can augment to their existing practices. My first question's for Farmer's Edge and Mr. Barnes. I had the opportunity to visit your website, very, very well indeed. One of the titles is Enrich Soil and Your Bank Account. And you spoke to this in your testimony. I assume then that you're working directly with farmers to be able to create programming and for them to be able to verify some of their results such that they can take advantage of some of the corporate opportunities that are out there and perhaps, of course, the offset by ECCC in the days ahead. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So our focus right now is the voluntary market. There is a significant amount of corporate clients on both sides of the border that are focused on their zero emissions. Agricultural offsets are the most sought after offsets out there, but they're also the most concerning because of the lack of transparency. And when a farm is digitalized and that they have an electronic record, then suddenly, I would say corporate companies can feel much more secure of acquiring those offsets, so that it's not greenwashing, if I could say. But with that, they're willing to pay a premium for those offsets. And regardless of whether they come from Alberta or Ontario, Quebec, I think there's a huge opportunity. The second part to that is beyond just the sale of the offset, what can be created around premiums for low carbon grain and products that are coming off of that farm, because that is the next wave.
Okay. I want to get into verification, because when I have conversations with stakeholders across the country, that becomes a big piece. Obviously, your company is in that space. I presume that there's others that might be also in that realm in the private sector. Do you see it as government's role to play a helping hand with farmers, or is this something that, of course, the private sector can take a leading role in terms of the verification of farmers meeting some of these protocols to take advantage of these opportunities?
Yeah, so we've had experience in both the regulatory market in Alberta and now the voluntary market. I think in both cases you need an independent verifier in order to ensure that these credits are credible. So I think government can play a role to ensure that a third party is verifying it. I think that would be helpful when it comes to even corporate clients buying those offsets and having some governance around it.
Mr. Barnes, but beyond the regulatory approach of actually auditing the pieces, it's the tools on farm for farmers to be able to illustrate some of this work that you're talking about. I hear you on the regulatory piece, but in terms of the actual tools on farm, is that best delivered by private companies like yourself that can help digitize some of this, or does government have a role in incentivizing that behavior?
Well, look, I think it depends on how you look at it. One, the investment on the farm to be able to digitalize that, to get that data, and so that data is verifiable. That is critical, and Canada can play a huge role in that. The question is that our friends south of the border are essentially using crop insurance as a way to incentivize farmers to implement those practices. Does government have a role to play? Possibly, if you want to speed the digitalization up at the farm level, it could. The other side of it is not get in the road of a transaction between a farmer and a corporate client to create value, because they'll make those investments on their own.
Yep. Okay. Mr. Gilvesi, I appreciate your testimony. One of the things you talked about is we need to make sure that there's technical advice in our local communities. And you obviously highlighted the work that Alice is doing in that domain. But if there's not an Alice, let's say perhaps in my own community in Nova Scotia, how do we make sure that technical expertise exists? What advice would you have to government to ensure that happens? Because there was a lot in the budget and the fall economic statement around supporting the type of efforts that you're undertaking as an organization. But how do we get that expertise such that if I am a farmer, I can turn to someone if there is no Alice in my backyard?
Well, my answer is twofold. First, we'd love to bring Alice to your community.
Sure.
So there's that. But one of the, in my history as a farmer, the biggest missing thing for us has been the lack of the loss of extension for farmers. And the role of extension has been taken over largely by the suppliers that sell the inputs for farms. This is a bit of a missing link, because that knowledge about what we're embarking on here today has to come from somewhere credible. It's become the backbone of our program, and I cannot stress enough the importance of it. That government does have a role to play to provide this extension that we've lost over time.
Okay. Mr. Barnes, I just want to go back to you for one more. I have about 45 seconds as per my clock. You talked about BRM, and of course you mentioned the United States using some of their crop insurance program to incentivize that digitization. I heard from your comments more that this is not only good for environment, but it can include reduced risks by shoring up margins and protecting the overall viability of farms. Is that kind of what you were getting at in your comments?
Yeah, absolutely. The ability of digitalization using data allows, right now we have reinsurers who are now looking to go and work directly with growers because they can actually do a better job of risk management at a lower cost for the grower than the grower utilizing subsidized insurance. And so I think that governments can utilize that data the same way to provide better products to their farmers and put less risk on the taxpayer.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's my time, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to keep going, but
yeah, that's the time. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And we'll go to our next questioner, Monsieur Perron. Allez-y pour 6 minutes. Merci.
6 minutes, Mr. Perron. Thank you. Thank you to both witnesses. Thank you for this very interesting presentation. Mr. Barnes, I'd like to talk about how BRMs can support digitization of data. You talked about the American example, if I'm not mistaken, where it could be used as an incentive. Could you speak to this? What concrete measures could be taken by the government?
So if I can look back to my history, as when our company was first founded, the government came out with what they call environmental farm plans. And as part of that, there was an incentive for farmers to utilize GPS equipment, variable rate application equipment, and the use of private consultants to help them with their 4R program. And it was hugely, I should say, farmers were very concerned at the beginning about providing this type of information to government. But once they got over those fears, they overwhelmingly use that program. And that is the foundation of technology on the farm, it's specifically in Western Canada. And I see the digitalization no different. As farmers move from precision ag to digital, and digital is the use of data to help make decisions, I think that the government could use a similar playbook as what they had with the environmental farm plan years ago.
Thank you very much. Second question, then I'll ask a question of Mr. Gilvesi. You mentioned that it was important to have incentives so that it be as voluntary as possible, and it's not just carbon capture that exists, and to incentivize people to invest so that producers will invest to go ahead. Here's my question. How can we, when we set out a program that might be an incentive, how can we recognize what the producers have done already, those who have already done efforts? We talked about having some sort of credits or offsets, and some people said that as of 2018, producers such as yourself, who have been working on this for a long time, how could this be considered?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality of it is that there might be a short window to look back. You're not going to be able to most likely provide value to the time that the growers started these processes. But I think we should at least look forward and incentivize on an ongoing basis. Now, again, some of this can be done through a reduction of cost of crop insurance or lending to implement some of the technology that's required to actually create the sustainability processes on the farm. And again, I think the government has done this in the past and it's been successful.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Gilvesi, sur la même question, comment on peut faire pour reconnaître
How can you recognize what has been realized by people in the past? What has been done in the past?
This is a very challenging question, and fortunately, we have 31 farmer-led packs across the country that have addressed it. And what they feel that is it's important to recognize a farmer's contributions dating all the way back to Kyoto. So we recognize within our programming something we call by your own hand. So farmers that have gone before and provided stewardship activities that they've got some evidence of that they've provided, we work hard to enroll those in the program. Now that's a classic farmer solution by the leaders of in the landscape analysis. We do need to recognize those that have gone forward first. Otherwise, we'll be setting very bad precedents where people will tear down trees in order to get carbon credit to plant new ones. So that's where we landed on that.
Thank you. I really liked what you said earlier when you're talking about creating value on the farm and to help, and also that eco-service should have a value in the market and that there's other uses in the market. If you, for example, protect the environment further, this should be calculated. It should be considered in the mix. It's very complex. It's very complex for a government to try to set a figure. Do you have concrete recommendations to make?
Our partnership advisory committees have landed a way of pricing projects across the country, but it's through research that we will determine their true value. We work with Dr. Wan-Hung Yang at the University of Guelph, who's provided some very impressive IM-Web's models on some of the watersheds where we operate. This model will generate quite specific quantities of how much water those farm sites will filter, how much more biodiversity will come, how much more resilience there is for the downstream communities, how much carbon gets sequestered. There are ways to get at these numbers and understand the true value. We've learned over the years that one of the early adopters in our program are municipalities, because they know when they invest in farmers upstream, they can save tremendous amount of money on roads not washing out, because we've done wetland programming, for instance. There's a marketplace for all this work, and we can figure that out by comparing the work that farmers do through nature-based solutions to built infrastructure, and then the mathematics become easy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gilvesi. When you're talking about these recommendations and documents, if you have documents that you haven't provided to the committee, please send them in. And then I'll come back to the next during the next round of questions. Thank you, Mr. Perron. Mr. McGregor.
Helping with our study today. Maybe I'll start with Mr. Gilvesi with Alice. I was struck by your comment in your opening remarks that went, programming must provide value at the farm gate. I can remember, like, my wife and I, we have a small farming property, and when we first got it, it was pretty much a bee desert. And we have got some apple trees, and we took some time to plant a lot of flowering plants all over the place, slowly brought the bees back, and we got the benefit from a huge apple crop in subsequent years. I guess, can you expand on that comment and maybe put it in the context of some specific recommendations you would like to see in our eventual report to the government?
I think it's, we are farmer-led. Our whole program is developed from the farmer's perspective. I think, I'm trained as a business person, and I think first and foremost, what Alice attempts to do is to make sure that the value that farmer creates, a significant amount of it stays with the farmer. I would hate to see, as we've seen in the past with carbon in particular around the world, so much of the money has disappeared into verification and in trading and all those sorts of things. The money went to Bay Street rather than downtown Main Street at Tillsonburg, for instance. I think it's important to recognize that this is a unique role that only farmers can play, the one I'm talking about. And when farmers participate in this marketplace, it can be much more rewarding than a single dimensional solution, like just paying for one dimension of their work. I stand for finding value for the farmer. Our New Acre project provides a transactional vehicle that corporations can see their outcomes performed by farmers on the landscape in a way that provides for shared value for the farmer and for the corporation. And ultimately, we hope they all have an epiphany like you had, that by doing activities like this, they'll have more pollinators on their land, they'll have bigger crop yields and more fruit and better fruit.
Yes, thank you. You should have seen the collective light bulbs that went off for my wife and I. We've been learning every single year on our property. So thank you for that. Mr. Barnes, may I turn to you? I also, as Mr. Blois was looking at the Farmer's Edge website, and I was looking at the soil sampling services that your company provides. Do you do anything, and I know a lot of it's looking at, the proper mix of nutrients, making sure they're applied at the right time, using that new and emerging technology so that farmers really not paying more than they need to and applying the right amount. Do your soil sampling services also look at soil ecology? Because plants have an amazing and very complex relationship with the bacteria in the soil as well. And there's a very very interesting interplay between the two. Anything that you do on soil ecology services?
Not for soil sampling at this time, but I will say that there's a significant movement around biologicals in mainstream agriculture across North America, where they're going to use the application of biologics to help reduce the amount of nitrogen or get, I would say that the jury is still out on how effective that will be, but there's a lot of promise around that. And now, again, a big part of the use of new technologies like that is being able to measure how effective it actually is. I can tell you that farmers, we like to call it pixie dust, that lots of salesmen come down the road and knock on the door and try to sell a farmer a solution that he might to a problem that he probably doesn't have. And then farmers will use it and believe that it works. And we believe that, how do you actually validate it? No different than implementing management processes on the farm. How do you know it happened? You need to have a way to record that. No different when the use of these type of technologies. And I can tell you that farmers are great business people, and if there's a way to get more yields with less cost, they'll do it.
Yeah, that was actually I think you're referring to. I was reading up on the bacteria, the nitrogen fixing bacteria. Is that what you're specifically referring to there?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And that sort of brings me to something maybe that the government of Canada can play. I've had the privilege of touring AAFC's research station in Summerland, British Columbia. They've got a very dedicated team of scientists there. In terms of maybe looking at what might be considered pixie dust at the moment, do you think the government of Canada should be maybe devoting more research dollars into those areas? Is that maybe one of the recommendations we can be making as a committee?
Well, if I look at the biological market, the majority of those are startups that have come from people that have worked in industry of big fertilizer companies or big ag that have been funded by venture capitalists to go out and actually do the research to create these products. And no offense against government research, but if there was a path to enhance investment into private startups, I think you'll see much quicker movement towards solutions. And we're seeing a lot of those come out of the US, where the US investors are much more, they have more courage when it comes to investing into startups.
Right. And I think that takes my time, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. And we'll start with our second round. Monsieur Lehoux, allez-y pour 5 minutes, Monsieur Lehoux. Monsieur Lehoux, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Mr. Lehoux, do you hear me? 5 minutes? Mr. Lehoux, do you hear me? Yes. Okay. 5 minutes, Mr. Lehoux. All right. My question. Well, maybe I was in my dreams of last night. So I'm going to get things going here. So I will now speak to Mr. Gilvessi to begin with. What are some elements that could be more relevant, or what could be a relevant role that the government could play in order to support organizations such as yours?
I think there's a role for government to obtain from organizations like ours delivery of services that are important to Canadians. And that delivery forms part and parcel of the funding envelope that drives an organization like Alice. We not only expect to deliver on behalf of Canadian governments, provincial governments, and municipal governments, but we also work hard to unearth every possible marketplace to also support our programming for maximum effect. That means reaching out to the philanthropic community for our developmental work, and indeed making sure that we are the leaders in making relationships with corporate Canada to drive money to the farm gate. I think this is a properly played role for the public and private to work together.
Effectivement.
So you mentioned, well, you spoke about the cooperation of local co-ops and cooperation with local organizations of producers. Is this something that should be improved in this context where we're trying to get the maximum amount of cooperation or buy-in by producers?
I think it's absolutely vital. The more people we can collaborate with in rural Canada, the better solutions we're going to find. Our program in Quebec, in Montérégie, for instance, is rooted with the UPA. They administer the program there together with other partners, including the Port of Montreal and others that bring programming to bear in that particular community. Yes, it is the way to go forward. It's a collaborative, the likes of we've not seen typically before, where we're working with communities on the landscape.
Vous devancez ma question.
You're ahead of me. You partly answered my next question when you talked about the what's happening in Saint-Hyacinthe and that it's already in place and that they're working in order to improve and even broaden the scope. So now, Mr. Barnes, you as well, you are developing, you were saying earlier that in Quebec, do you have work that's been done with different organizations or producers?
We are currently in discussions with some very important agricultural players in the marketplace in Quebec. So we're hopefully will be able to form partnerships by this fall and start to implement some of our programs into that marketplace.
Est-ce que vous avez une réflexion sur...
Do you have something to say about the impact? For example, yes, we want to work using this philosophy, but when you export elsewhere to other countries and other products can be imported as well, what is your thought process around things that are coming and leaving the country?
Well, look, again, like I said before, I think Canada has a unique opportunity to take the world lead when it comes to sustainability and the growth of commodities that have a sustainability footprint. So I've worked in the U.S., I've worked in Latin America, Eastern Europe, Australia. I think the Canadian farmer is unique because they do no other farmer in any other country has to work under the type of conditions that we operate in to grow a crop and then harvest it and get it to market. So again, our infrastructure that's here is set up to be a world leader, and I think an investment in digitalization could be significant to place the farmer closer to the end user.
Thank you. Merci, Monsieur Lehoux. Thank you, Mr. Barnes.
Avant que Monsieur le Président me remette à l'ordre.
Okay, I'm going to end there.
Tout est correct. Maintenant,
that's fine.
You're up for 5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses. I find it fascinating that you're both here. I believe it was you, Mr. Barnes, who mentioned that agriculture and sustainability go hand in hand, and the work that you're both doing at the agroecology, the agrotechnology, they also go hand in hand. So I find it very helpful today. I would start with my questions with Mr. Gilvesi. First, I wanted to say hello from RARE, the Charitable Research Reserve. I'm down the road from you in Kitchener-Conestoga and Waterloo region, and they were very happy to know that you're here, and they spoke highly of you, and I can certainly see why. We were talking about these nature-based climate solutions.
Not today, no.
And Mr. Chair, there you go. specifically flood mitigation and how municipalities and other levels, upper levels of government can work together that actually can save on infrastructure, flood washouts and stuff. Can you give some examples in your region, because it's the same area as mine, how some examples that we can protect our infrastructure with some climate solutions?
We've had some, the ecotype I'm going to point to here is the tallgrass prairie, you're familiar with that rare. I think in my home county, tallgrass prairie was the ecotype that was here at the beginning of time. It's a really unique, diverse set of grasses that are rooted extremely deep in the ground, up to 16 feet in the ground. They love drought and they love heat. This plant has come to have maximum utility for us in providing erosion control, as you might imagine, and also the research that Andrew McDougall has done at the University of Guelph outlining how much nutrient these plants take up during the summer season. There's barely a nutrient that gets past them and into the water courses. So they provide an enormous impact on erosion control, especially on highly erodible landscapes like we have here in Southern Ontario, where I live. And of course, for keeping the nutrient on the field where it belongs.
I also believe from research that some of the tallgrass prairie buffer zones can be used to surround cornfields on some of the area that might be shaded or next to woods or something. Is that something that we can look into as well?
Exactly. Again, back in my home county, the county's largest farmers are active participants in our program. They use their yield monitors to identify for them lands that aren't particularly economic for them to farm. And invariably, when we're working in around the treat areas, that shaded area, the first few feet is often an opportunity to put those grasses back and increase the productivity of the whole farm. So it becomes more environmentally productive and more crop productive at the same time. These are the type of perfect solutions that our farmers on our packs come up with all the time.
Well, I look forward to hearing more and keeping in touch, because, like I said, I'm just down the road. But in the amount of time I have, I thought I would switch gears and talk to Mr. Barnes, because here in Waterloo Region, Kitchener-Conestoga represents the agriculture sector, but at the same time, we're also basically the tech sector of Canada as well. So tech and agriculture seem to naturally go hand in hand. And I'm down the road from University of Guelph and down the road from University of Waterloo. So you mentioned encouraging a next companies, startups in the industry, and maybe I'm thinking now, as I mentioned, universities, some of our youth. How can we encourage this next generation of farmers who naturally seem to embrace some of these ideas? How can we help them enter a market and work with technology in ways that can help?
Yeah, I could spend a whole hour discussing this, but in brief, I mean, when Farmers Edge started up, we had a terrible time seeking out capital, specifically from the Canadian market. Our first big capital injection came from Silicon Valley. And I would say that at the time, that company was focused on moving Farmers Edge out of Winnipeg and into Silicon Valley. And luckily we had a board of directors that was strong enough to hold us in this market. And we were lucky enough to become a publicly traded company here this year. So I would say that if there was ways, once you create this ecosystem in technology and agriculture, it feeds off itself. And, Farmers Edge, we're probably the first one to do an IPO, but with that, there's more and more companies that can play into it. And we've seen huge benefits out of the super cluster, specifically the protein cluster in Saskatchewan. And they've been a huge supporter, not only of Farmers Edge, but the splinter companies that will come out of that. And I think that it's just a change of culture. And I'm seeing now much more focus on supporting these type of startups today than what there was when we started.
Well, I thank you.
Mr. Barnes.
We'll continue to support our tech and our ag sector. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Et maintenant, M. Perron pour 2 minutes et demie. Allez-y, M. Perron.
Mr. Perron, 2.5 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Gilvesi, let's start up where we ended off. You mentioned in your introduction something that I hold dear, and that's flexibility to recognize local innovation, creativity. How can Canada assist?
I think we have to recognize the power of grassroots solutions. I have seen so many creative solutions from across the countryside where we operate, from where farmers in PEI are terracing their fields to hold the water and the topsoil on their fields by using fast-growing grasses, then harvesting those grasses to feed the cattle, and the manure goes back on the field to feed the fields. There are ways to recognize that grassroots solutions matter. And there's a lot of relatively simple things that people with their hands in their dirt for a lifetime can offer enormously powerful solutions.
Concrètement, Monsieur Gilvesi, là.
Mr. Gilvesi, how can we integrate this in a program, a pan-Canadian program? Though generally speaking, we do try to base ourselves on science, to have validated things. Do you have an idea of a mechanism, something that we could really implement so that people could submit the innovations, something that could be measured scientifically?
Our program is very good at aggregating within our catchment areas, of course. We are entering into a moment of scale for our organization where we will grow more rapidly across the country. But of course, it takes a very big listening ear to open yourself up to all these solutions.
Et la flexibilité, vous la...
And so this flexibility, as an example, if someone makes a proposal, you measure it, and then the government would have type of point system that would show the performance. Is that what you're getting at?
There's research that we are doing to measure the performance of these things, including our IAMWebs platform, including calculating carbon in the future, including counting biodiversity through different research platforms. So yes, the answer is that we try to apply the research to all these innovative ideas as quickly as we possibly can. But know this, that one of the principles of ALICE is that there must be some scientific evidence to support the activities that we're going to do. So having something rooted in science is a pretty good place to begin.
Thank you, Mr. Galvesi. Merci, Monsieur Perron. And now Mr. McGregor for 7.5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Barnes, you had said in your opening comments that it's good business to be environmentally sustainable, and I think we've seen that backed up by ALICE in saying that, you know, by employing some of these ecosystem saving projects on your land, it does have a material benefit in how a farm operates, in its outputs. But I also wanted to look at the consumer demand side of things, because in one of our previous meetings, we had Danone as a witness, and they were talking about how they were investing a considerable sum of their own private money to help farmers transition to regenerative agriculture. And they said it was primarily because consumers are looking to have a lot more information on how their food's grown, the techniques that are used, and so on. And so that's why Danone saw that as a smart investment, because of the consumer demand. In some of the relations with some of the companies that you do business with, are you seeing a trend in that direction? Anything you can tell us about that?
Yeah, this is where I think technology is going to play a huge factor, and it could enhance Canada's lead. You know, the consumer today wants to have more connectivity to who's growing their food. Historically, there's been multiple different parties between the consumer and the farmer. Technology essentially allows the consumer to have that direct relationship, understand how the food is grown, where it's grown, how it's produced, know what the carbon footprint is. And so I think to be able to implement that type of digital infrastructure, create that connectivity to the consumer, create that trust. I mean, that the technology will enable the consumer to trust that. And if Canada is the leader in that space, they're going to pull companies, whether it be General Mills or PepsiCo or Danone or McCain's or Maple Leaf, to do business with those Canadian farms. And I just think it's a significant opportunity that shouldn't be underlooked right now. And if we don't take advantage of it, I can guarantee you the Brazilians are moving. We operate into that market. The U.S., I would say that, and people might find this strange, but there's more openness towards some of these kind of change in management and the Australians. So this opportunity is time limited, and I would really suggest that we focus on how to take advantage.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. And that will conclude our first panel. And I'd like to thank from Alice, Mr. Brian Gilvesi, and also from Farmers Edge, Mr. Wade Barnes and Mr. Bruce Ringrose. Thank you so much for appearing. And to the rest of the members, quick return because we're a little bit tight on time. So 2 minutes, we'll be right back. So we'll just suspend for 2 minutes. Thank you. Association, Mr. Dwayne Thompson, Président Comité de l'Environnement, and also Fawn Jackson, Directrice Politique Relations Internationales. Bienvenue à vous deux. And from Terra America.
Welcome to both of you.
Eldon Donnelly, conseillère spéciale marché du carbone. Hopefully we can get your sound correct.
Eldon Donnelly, Special Advisor Carbon Markets.
Canadian Cattlemen Association for up to 7.5 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee to discuss the environment contributions of Canada's beef sector. My name is Fawn Jackson, and I'm the Director of Policy and International Affairs with the CCA. And with me today is Dwayne Thompson, a beef producer from Saskatchewan and chair of CCA's Environment Committee. CCA represents Canada's 60,000 beef producers. The beef industry contributes $22 billion to Canadian GDP, while supporting 348,000 jobs. But of great importance to our conversation today is that the beef industry is also a hidden gem when it comes to environment and green jobs. And well, perhaps not as well known outside, I know of this committee knows, but perhaps outside. In fact, beef production in Canada is one of the best tools we have to reach our shared conservation goals, climate change goals, while also providing good paying jobs for Canadian families. Canada is a leader when it comes to sustainable beef production. The Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef was created to advance sustainability within the beef industry and includes a collaborative community of stakeholders. Through CRSB, Canada was the first to create a certified sustainable beef framework that is used today by smaller direct marketers, as well as companies such as McDonald's and Chops Steakhouse. Since Canada's leadership, now other jurisdictions have also replicated the CRSB model, and we're pleased to share that. I'm pleased to have Dwayne Thompson join me today to offer further insights on how beef production can be a key partner in achieving Canada's environmental goals. Please, Dwayne.
Mr. Thompson, I think you're on mute.
Sorry.
Okay.
I'll try that again. Thank you, Fawn. Our family runs a beef cattle and cropping operation near Kelleher, Saskatchewan, northeast of Regina. We take pride in caring for the environment as part of our role as ranchers. In this country, cattle producers care for 35 million acres of temperate native grasslands. And while it doesn't often make the headlines, this grassland ecosystem is disappearing faster than the Amazon rainforests. Since the 1970s, we've seen a staggering loss of nearly 75% of native grasslands through land conversion. When the grasslands are lost, so too are the species that depend on the grasslands for their habitat. There are currently over 60 species at risk in Canada's grasslands, species that only exist because of continued beef production on native grasslands. Beef farmers and ranchers work closely with conservation partners on grassland habitat and biodiversity maintenance and enhancement to protect the grassland ecosystem. Cattle grazing and continued presence of livestock on these working landscapes support the conservation of species that depend on native grasslands like greater sage-grouse, burrowing owl, and many songbirds. In North American Bird Conservation Initiative 2019 State of Canada's Bird Report, they note that that grassland birds have declined by 57% since 1970 and emphasize that beneficial grazing on public and private land is critical for the creation and maintenance of grassland bird habitat. As a conservation action, the report recommends supporting sustainable range-fed beef, including beneficial pasture and hay management. Without beef production, these threatened native grasslands are at risk of conversion, and these at-risk species suffer the consequences. Since 2015, our industry has worked through Environment and Climate Change Canada's Species at Risk Partnership on Agricultural Land, known as SARPAL. We work directly with beef producers to promote and enhance habitat for a multitude of species at risk. SARPAL has proven to be a great environmental program through collaboration with the beef sector and conservation organizations. We work closely with our conservation partners, including Ducks Unlimited Canada, Nature Conservancy Canada, Birds Canada, and others to promote and deliver the beneficial management conservation solutions on the ground for our producers. Recently, Ducks Unlimited Canada launched their Beef Belongs website, highlighting the critical role beef cattle play in the health and enhancement of grasslands, wetlands, soil, biodiversity in Canada. In their words, raising beef in Canada is good for the environment. Grazing by livestock is essential for the complex native grasslands to flourish. These grasslands left without grazing are essentially lost by natural progression to habitats with lower conversion value, for example, brush and tree encroachment. By generating revenue through sustainable grazing practices, ranchers help ensure native grasslands are not converted to other uses. With respect to climate change, rangeland and wetlands managed by beef producers in Canada are carbon sinks. Conservatively, we store about 1.5 billion tons of carbon. The Canadian beef industry's greenhouse gas emission account for only 2.4% of Canadian total greenhouse gas emissions and 0.4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Our industry's greenhouse gas footprint is less than half that of the world average and one of the lowest in the world. Today, the beef industry is producing more beef with less greenhouse gas emissions, less land, and less water. The reductions in the beef industry's environmental footprint have largely come through genetics, animal health, and technologies that improve production efficiencies. We're very proud of this, but we're not sitting on our laurels. Producers across Canada continue to innovate and look for new ways to be sustainable and help the environment. In British Columbia, cattle producers are conducting pilot studies on the use of cattle grazing to reduce fuel loads under forest canopy to mitigate the risk of wildfires. The studies are developing virtual fencing technology that will be an innovative game changer for rotational grazing strategies, wildfire management, and enhancement of species habitat in remote grazing landscapes. Food loss and waste continues to be a large discussion in Canada's food system. Cattle are wonderful upcyclers. For example, the byproducts of the grains we produce on our farm, such as the stems and stalks after harvesting grain, can be fed to cattle. So can grains that are headed for food markets, but perhaps don't meet the high standards needed for the grain market because they're spoiled or heated. And this example goes much farther than with our own farm. Cattle also eat byproducts of the wine and beer production, wilted produce and byproducts of the canola production. This last year, when COVID hit, there were many potatoes that weren't going to restaurants, and they were able to be fed to cattle instead of going to the landfills. Lastly, it's worth noting that in the past year, the Canadian beef industry has set ambitious 2030 goals related to greenhouse gas and carbon sequestration. Among other targets, our industry is committed to safeguarding the existing 1.5 billion tons of carbon stored on landscapes. We will also sequester an additional 3.4 million tons of carbon every year to reduce primary production greenhouse gas emission intensity by 33% in 2030.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. And so we'll give it a try with Ms. Donnelly. You can give it a try and hopefully it'll work. So if it works, you've got up to 7.5 minutes if you want to give it a try, and we'll see how it comes out.
Or you could just pretend it's not working and kick me out if you don't like what I'm saying.
No, we certainly like to have you for your testimony and questions. So if you want to give it a try, hopefully it'll work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members, for the invitation to speak with you today. My name is Alden Donnelly, and I'm joining you remotely from my home, which is in the traditional territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I am the Senior Advisor, Carbon Markets at Terramera, a BC-based ag tech company. I'm also a co-founder and major shareholder of Nori Inc., a 3.5-year-old blockchain-based startup that is building a transparent, credible, and farmer-accessible carbon removal marketplace in the United States. Nori is head officed in Seattle, Washington. Also, from the mid-1990s through 2000, I was the founder of the Greenhouse Emissions Management Consortium, or GEMCO. GEMCO's membership included, over time, 14 of Canada's then 20 largest corporate greenhouse gas emitters. In that capacity, I raised the private funding that spawned the launch of the Canada's Prairie Soils Carbon Balance Project, a private sector, public sector partnership under the AAFC's Original Matching Investment Initiative. In October 1999, acting on behalf of the Canadian large emitters, I signed the world's first agreement to purchase emission reduction credits from farmers. I guess that means I've been around this for a while. Terramera's work centers on how can we enable farmers to unlock the intelligence in nature to inform their land management decisions. We develop software and analytical tools to empower our food and fiber producers to increase soil health and nutrient productivity, mitigate climate change risk, realize more stable on-farm financial returns, and build a more resilient soil layer for future generations. Building up soil organic carbon stocks is one of the very few measures that we can pursue that both mitigates the risk of climate change while building a natural system that will also be more resilient and productive in the event of climate change. I wish to stress that it's essential for Canadian policymakers and influencers to embrace this opportunity to show the rest of the world a new path forward to realization of a true market for natural climate solutions. Canada led the world with the Montreal Protocol. This is our next chance to lead the world to essential and workable climate risk mitigation and adaptation solutions. According to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, Canada ranks among the top 5 countries in the world for potential to draw heat-trapping gases out of the atmosphere when the recovered carbon is stored in soils and root systems. Along with Russia, the US, China, and Brazil, some assessments rank Canada number 2. A recently published analysis by leading Canadian scientists suggests that our croplands and grazing lands have the capacity to sequester an incremental 78 million tons CO2 equivalent per year by 2030. That's 25 to 35% of the nationwide reduction we must achieve relative to actual 2019 emission levels to meet our 2030 Paris Agreement goals. What's the reality? After 18 years of experience, the voluntary and compliance offset credit market experiments that have been launched in other nations have failed to mobilize any significant investment in greenhouse gas reduction and sequestration, and that's across all sectors, not just ag. Since 2002, all existing voluntary and compliance offset initiatives have combined to issue and retire less than 2.5 billion credits. That sounds like a lot, but even if 100% of these credits have a true underlying value of 1 ton carbon dioxide equivalent reduced or sequestered, those retired credits equate to only 10 to 15% of 1 year's worth of the greenhouse gas emissions discharged by the top 50 corporate emitters in the world. So this is a statistically insignificant experiment so far. Canadian policymakers and stakeholders must work together to show a new path forward. This can be Canada's next Montreal Protocol moment. It is time for us to step up and show the world what getting this right looks like, as we did when it came to figuring out how to work out of our supply chains the use of substances, the releases of which were causing the hole in our ozone layer. Canada is positioned to develop and demonstrate the world's first efficient and truly a functional natural climate solutions voluntary and compliance markets. We are trying to foster new markets that reward ecosystem services, not more underfunded subsidy programs that dictate land management practices to farmers. I do have in my opening remarks 6 specific recommendations of what we need to do, but I think I'll cut off here to save time and invite you to look at my documentation when it's available to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Donnelly. So far, so good, I think. So we'll go with our question round, and we'll start with Ms. Rood, and I also want to welcome Mr. Alex Ruff as part of the panel. I believe you will be sharing your time. So go ahead, Ms. Rood, for 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for appearing here this afternoon. Ms. Donnelly, last week we heard from officials at Environment Canada say that farmers should only be given credit for practices that they have not already put in place. But I believe you said that early adopters of CO2 mitigation and capture should not be penalized. So just to be clear, I'm wondering if you agree with Environment Canada officials that farmers should not be given credit for things they have already done or would have done. And could you maybe comment on how a carbon credit market should be set up to give farmers farmers financial incentives for capturing carbon in the soil?
I must respond by saying no, I do not agree with the position that farmers should not get credit for early action. But I also totally empathize with the officials and understand why that's their starting place. We just have to give them the tools they need to make sure that's not where they end up. There are a couple of things. First, in terms of solution, in the Nori marketplace, and any decision you make or anyone makes will be a compromise. We surveyed a bunch of very interested market buyers and secured support among that buyer community for the idea that we would issue credits, and there are two tests for soil carbon stock changes arising from changes in practices that might have been implemented any time after December 31st, 1999. I kind of like Brian Gilvesi's Kyoto 1997 start date a lot. We picked 1999 in the U.S. just because we found we had data availability issues before that, and that was our binding constraint. But we also said we would only issue a maximum of 5 years worth of grandfathered credits to any project. So in that, when you're doing that design, separate the question of what's the not before date for the investment that triggers the incremental carbon stock change versus how many years of crediting are you getting. Any decision we'll make will be arbitrary, but I think it's really important that we struggle with that and reach consensus on a decision that does give early adopters credit. And the other point I'd like to make is in every outside Canada anyway, variation on cap and trade rules, any oil producer or refinery operator that has an emission intensity that's lower than their peers gets surplus and marketable allowances in exchange for that performance, even if they have been performing in that manner for 25 years. So why would we give credit for early action to oil refineries and not to farmers? I don't get that one.
Thank you very much. I'll cede my time to Mr. Ruff.
Well, thanks for having me here at the Ag Committee. My questions will be directed to the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. So I'd like to say I agree with your testimony, as do a multitude of farmers in my riding of Bruce Grey Owen Sound. I'd say the best beef producers in Eastern Canada, so I don't get into a fight here with my Western colleagues. But your testimony, you talked about how essential providing habitat for species at risk are by our beef producers that rely on those grasslands. So I'd like to give you a minute to further expand on how those pastures benefit both the species, biodiversity in general, and even the health of the grazing cattle.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to take some of the questions and then pass it over to Dwayne. And certainly what we see is when grazing is done well is that we are really able to stack the benefits that come with them. So you could have, a biodiversity benefit, you could have a wetland restoration, you could have flood mitigation, you could have, all of these different stacking benefits. And I think that that's really exciting, particularly to those in the markets who are certainly interested in greenhouse gases, but they're also interested in the rippling effects that go along with them. And Australia, for example, had a project with Microsoft where they purchased carbon offsets, but then also had these biodiversity pieces that went through it as well. And I would say that it's been really exciting over the last number of years where conservation organizations and the farmer and rancher community, I think, have really hit our stride in how we work together and bringing the expertise of the producer who knows that land and the expertise of biologists and riparian specialists together has just really resulted in some amazing results. And I think we need to keep on replicating that.
Thanks so much for that response, Ms. Jackson. I guess my next question for either yourself or Mr. Thompson would be that, unfortunately, and you mentioned about how important beef farmers are for carbon sequestration, but that's not necessarily what ends up in the headlines or in the media sometimes. So what can we do as parliamentarians to help combat and dispel these, the bad headlines and just re-emphasize the importance of cattle producers in the beef for climate change and for the environment in general?
Yeah, well, certainly appreciate that question. And I must admit that I think we perhaps took it for granted for a bit too long that Canadians were connected to the farm and really understood what was happening on the farms. And we are fully aware that we need to be having very serious conversations with Canadians to help them understand that beef production in Canada preserves a native ecosystem, one that's endangered, one that is very integrated with the success of the cropping ecosystem in Canada too. So, we're certainly fully in on this. And something that we've done is that we've partnered, for example, on a film called Guardians of the Grasslands. Please, everybody, watch it. Please share it through your
Thank you
through your networks. So that's
thank
something.
you, Ms. Jackson. We're out of time. Mr. Ellis, for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Ellis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank the witnesses for attending. And my first question goes to both the witnesses. The Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada report entitled Environmental Sustainability of Agriculture explains that provinces supported by federal government have been working with farmers to help them implement environmental farm plans in order to reduce the environmental impact of their activities since 2005. However, the report notes that farmers often fail to fully implement the beneficial management practices identified in their plans because of economic pressures and lack of time. What could the federal government do to support farmers in implementing environmental farm plans? In what ways can economic pressures defer farmers from implementing these environmental farm plans?
Should I start?
Yeah, you can start. Yeah.
Farmers need revenues from new sources, not just inside the food supply chain, but outside the food supply chain. This opportunity for them to coincidentally sequester carbon in their soils while they're adopting practices that reduce water pollution, increase water infiltration and retention rates, and deliver all sorts of other biodiversity benefits might be, in fact, a one-time opportunity to provide the financing or spawn the financing that farmers need to adopt the changes in land management that are being recommended by the experts at this time.
I would add that through the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef Certified Sustainable Program, it's an outcome based, so farmers can choose how they would like to deliver on the outcomes that we're looking for. But the use of environmental farm plans has been very helpful for some producers in proving what they've been able to do. So it's certainly been a helpful tool, but I would say, to echo that it's one tool in the toolbox, and we need to make sure that we have all, a number.
Okay. Canadian Cattlemen, you kind of touched on your 2030 goals, and I just wanted to know if you could explain your goals, and if you had goals before this. Is there targets that were set before 2030?
Mm-hmm. So we do have a number of goals, and really happy to share them and how we plan on achieving them. But a few of them are to safeguard the 35 million acres of native grasslands. I would note that those are the native grasslands, but there's of course all of the tame grasslands and the haylands that also offer pollinator habitat, all the other benefits too. But to safeguard those and to safeguard the carbon that is stored in them. We also want to sequester an additional 3.4 million tons of carbon every year, and to reduce our greenhouse gas intensity by 33% by 2030. I would like to make the point that I think it's really important that we look at the broad array of government policies that are being brought forward right now on climate change, and making sure that they don't have unintended consequences and how they interact. So I do want to make that point.
Hey, Ms. Donnelly, you touched, and you weren't able to touch on it. You ran out of time. You had 6 recommendations. Could you explain any of them to us?
Sure. Maybe I could look at them. The most important one is the opportunity, and the necessity here is to develop carbon offset quantification and credit issuance protocols that are in fact very different, but reflect the lessons learned from the experiences in other jurisdictions. Those existing offset markets have failed. They've taught us a lot. Now it's time for us to build the system that's really going to work. The other, I think, of the six, the second really important thing is back in the 1990s, the experts, the community, and AAFC agreed that critical to making this market work is building and sustaining a network of experimental sites across the country where we're doing robust soil, plant nutrient testing. We're publishing the data so that the whole ag community can see what's being proved in those soils. And in fact, Canada committed to building and maintaining that network back in the 1990s, and then the funding for it fell apart in the mid-2000s. The USDA did the same thing, got funding in place in 2002. They agreed that that was key, a key backbone. They got all the funding in place to do what was required in the United States in funding submissions that said Canada's doing it right, so we need to do it right too. Then by 2009, their funding was cut. So from those lessons, I think we've learned we need to build that backbone, that network of experimental sites, but we need to build it in such a way that it's seen as key infrastructure and will attract private financing so that we don't yet again go down a path of depending on government revenues that'll be cut in 5 to 7 years and have it fall apart again.
Okay, and my last question is the Canadian cattlemen. Since the implementation of price on pollution, what steps has your organization or the sector taken to facilitate a transition to a greener alternatives?
Yeah, so certainly our environmental goals are a portion of that, but right now we're particularly focused on carbon markets and the development of protocols, and that there's going to be meaningful protocols put in place to be able to recognize the practices done by beef producers, and so that we can further our contribution. So those are a couple of the examples. I could go on for a long time though.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Thank you, Ms. Jackson. And we'll go to Monsieur Perron pour 6 minutes. Allez-y, Monsieur Perron.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci aux témoins.
Thank you to the witnesses for being here. I'll begin with Mrs. Jackson. You bring forth a very interesting aspect when you talk about the preservation of indigenous grasslands and natural species. So how can we create a balance if we look at greenhouse gases emitted by the cattle? So how do you balance this? How do you offset it? Is there a way to measure this?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been going to great lengths to make sure that we can measure it, and so that we can set goals to reduce. As Dwayne mentioned in his comments, we already have a footprint that is 50% of the world average. And so our producers, in partnership with veterinarians, in partnership with nutritionists and researchers who keep on driving it forward, are certainly focused on that reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions. But also, on the other side of the ledger is this amazing store of carbon that, I think wasn't fully appreciated previously, about how stable it is, and also the opportunity to increase the carbon sequestration in those grasslands through very targeted grazing management practices. So, I think that lots of people have really heard about the emission side of beef production, but they really haven't heard about this other side, and we need to make sure that we're understanding it as a whole picture.
Okay, merci. J'aimerais que vous me parliez.
Thank you. I'd like to hear you. I'm not sure if it's you, Mr. Thompson, or not, but you talked about experimenting with certain lines to prevent forest fires. Could you speak further on this?
Sure. I'm no expert on it, but the cattle in a forest environment have the ability to be between grazing and tramping and just habitating those areas. They can keep the underbrush down to a minimum and keep that fuel source down so that it doesn't present the risk of the big major fires that we've had in the past. Because in the past there were small fires that kept those covers of understory in check. But because it's closer to urban areas now that small fires are not acceptable, cattle can come in and replace that and keep some of that undergrowth in check and hopefully mitigate some of the fire risk.
Merci.
Thank you. That's a great example of the interaction that's possible. Mrs. Donnelly, earlier on, when my colleague was asking questions, you spoke to the importance of recognizing what people have done in the past and how to measure this, units of measurement. And you say that it's possible to measure. If we look at the surface, that we can measure the level of innovation of producers and have a start point that would be fair for everyone. So those that are still large polluters and those that have already made efforts in the past to obtain credits. Did I understand this correctly?
You did. You will hear that I rarely use the term measure and default to estimate. So we are estimating the impacts of changes in practices, changes in land soil treatment and management techniques relative to a baseline. And there are uncertainties that are quite substantial associated with those estimates. But if we're comparing trends over time using techniques we know now, we can come up with a reliable enough credit quantification and issuance procedure to build a market in which there is confidence, as long as we are producing our estimates with uncertainty intervals. And that will be that's the big change. You know, getting a soil test result out of a lab with estimates that include uncertainties requires the labs to operate differently in the future from how they typically operate now. But we know how to do that. So that's the first thing. I also think it's, and we can talk about it more if you'd like, but it's not hard once the private sector knows what the uncertainty intervals are to construct financial rewards and contracts that reimburse the farmer or rancher initially based on a conservative interpretation of the estimate and supplement the payment to the farmer over time as uncertainty declines over time. So you can build incentives for investment in innovation and new technology into the crediting market from day one.
Parfait. Merci beaucoup. C'est une réponse très, très claire.
Thank you. That's a very clear answer. You mentioned that voluntary programs weren't working, but we have many people that have said that it's important to free up local creativity and to give flexibility to producers so that there are specific innovations. I don't see how it's possible in a mandatory program. Could you explain further?
The key, whether the program is voluntary or mandatory, is to not prescribe practices to land managers and to come up with those estimation and crediting methods that I just referred to reward outcomes, to build the reward in such a way that the farmers, the landowners,
thank you.
Get more with better numbers. Sorry.
Thank you. I have to jump to the next question. And now, Mr. Alistair, for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Alistair. McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll start with the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. Maybe I'll just make a couple of quick comments. Mr. Thompson, in a former life, I worked as a tree planter for 8 years, and one of my big contracts was at the Douglas Lake Ranch in British Columbia. And so I've certainly seen how cattle keep the forest fire danger down through that rotational grazing through their lands. And then one other thing, the BC Cattlemen's Association were very kind to invite me out to the Okanagan last year in September. And I went and visited 2 ranches that had previously won the Ranch Sustainability Award. I went to the Clifton Ranch in Karamias and the Casorso Ranch in Oliver, and it was just very educational to actually speak to the ranchers themselves, actually go and visit the grasslands and see the relationship between cattle and grass, because of course this relationship is thousands of years old. Before we had cattle, we had bison there, and so we have to remember that the best farming practices mimic what's already going on in nature. So you need to have that relationship between plant and animal and mimic what's been going on for thousands of years. You've already given the committee a lot of information, but maybe Ms. Jackson, maybe in a minute or so, is there anything else that you wanted to cover, maybe in the context of recommendations you'd like to see in this kind of a report to the federal government specifically?
Yeah, I would like to reiterate that I think that having those outcome-based and letting the producers figure out what is the solution is really, really important. And then enabling them to do those is key. And I'll continue on the forestry example. If you want to do fencing in British Columbia, I think it's somewhere upwards of $20,000 per kilometer. And we need to do the virtual fencing then to be able. So we need investments there and to drive that innovation to enable the practices that help us all.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very interested. It's the first time I've heard of the virtual fencing solution, but yes, no, our province is not the easiest one to get around on. It looks like a carpet that's been bunched up. You'll just keep on running into a mountain range. Maybe I'll turn to Ms. Donnelly, and thank you for that answer, Ms. Jackson. Ms. Donnelly, in your on your website, you were talking it's referring to the 78 gigatons of CO2 that can be pulled out of the atmosphere and sequestered in our soil carbon. I've been wondering, I guess that's an annual figure you're referring to, like the potential we have every year.
Yeah, it takes a while to build up to that. And so the current estimate of the science community in a public education that was just released last Friday says we could get up to 78 million tons per year by 2030. And it'll take the next 9 years to build up to that, with a lower than 78 million ton average then. The thing that's really interesting is the theoretical capacity for us to store incremental carbon in our soils is about equal to what our current estimate of the soil organic carbon stocks are. So in theory, you can't build up soil carbon stocks faster than nature is willing to. But that capacity to sequester an incremental 70 to 80 million tons per year persists for hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, because I've been wondering about that. Like when I've previously spoken to agriculture and agri-food scientists, they have made mention that it would be nice to get updated soil maps for Canada.
Oh yeah.
And I can see you nod your head on that. So if you wanted to add anything to that specific thing, but I was also, if you'd like to talk about that, but also, is there an idea of, and I know Canada's soils are very diverse, but is there an idea of just sort of, what the maximum storage capacity of soil is where, it's just not possible to store anymore? Because I know it's a process. The soil takes some in, but it also gives some away as you're growing plants.
Yeah. I can't answer that clearly. There's a theoretical maximum, which is, I'm not going to do the arithmetic in my head right. The CO2 equivalent of 80 billion tons.
Okay, and then on the updated soil maps, if you would like to speak about that, and just could you lend us words as to what you would like to maybe see in a recommendation?
There are lots of good reasons that have nothing to do with carbon for updating the soil maps, and I'll leave those aside right now. But I'm just going to go really sort of lazy on you as someone who's trying to build a market. In real life in nature, we know that there's a maximum theoretical annual increase possible in soil carbon stocks. That's about 1% per year of the background stock. So if I'm trying to build a market and figure out how to monetize all the information I've got, if I have a good soil map in the background, I can introduce the test. Well, if my calculation says it's more than 1% per year, it's probably wrong. So if I'm working in a marketplace where I've got good background soil mapping, I can bring financing in because I've got sort of an insurance number in the background. If I haven't seen that soil map updated since 1991, I don't have the 1% QA/QC rule I can stick into my financing story.
You got to know where you are if you want to know where you're going.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Good wise word. Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. And we'll go to Mr. Steinley for 5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Steinley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. And Ms. Jackson, you said something that really stuck with me when you said government policy is having unintended consequences. And we just did a study on MP Lawrence's bill about exempting some fuels from the carbon tax. Would you say that's one of the unintended consequences is a catch-all policy that there isn't, for example, alternatives to barn heating or irrigation pump running or grain dryers? So could you talk about some of that from a producer standpoint, maybe Mr. Thompson as well? It's nice to have some more Saskatchewan common sense here at the committee. So if you guys could really just kind of expand on some of those unintended consequences that government policies sometimes lead producers to have to undergo.
Yeah, our position has been that, you know, the reasons that we exempt agriculture are because, you know, we don't have options. We just end up pushing food production to other jurisdictions through leakage, and that really the place to invest is on the innovation and technology front to help producers make changes, you know, when they're available, and to invest in that research portion. But, you know, I'm going to hand it over to Dwayne, because of course he has both a grain and a cattle operation to talk about the impact of carbon taxes on his operation.
Thank you. And thank you for the question. You know, the unintended consequences of the tax is it hits home pretty hard, because when we have to operate under our we can't change our market prices. We take the prices we get, and we get the extra taxes it costs us. And so, you know, agriculture is a system, and we talk about the systems that link everything together. And so when we're added on an extra the tax and have to, when I'm not really familiar with some of the other things, because some of the fuel we don't use for heating barns and things in our operation. But you know, when it comes to carbon, you know, one of the questions earlier was how much can we actually store? Well, there is maybe a finite amount of carbon that we can store, but there's no finite amount of soil we can build in our systems. And so, you know, I don't think that links into the unintended consequences question, but those are my thoughts.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that very much, and thank you. And on behalf of my caucus colleague, Mr. Scheer, he'd like to say hi, as you're a constituent of his out in Kalahar. I'd also like to ask, Mr. Ellis asked about EFPs, environmental farm plans, and he said something about farmers not having a follow through. I have a personal relationship with EFPs. My cousin actually did about 10,000 environmental farm plans in Southwest Saskatchewan, and he said there is substantial farmer follow through, because the ranchers and producers knew that making these changes and investments in environmental farm plan and doing these policies were better for the soil, and in the long run, what's better for your soil, what's better for your grasslands, is better for your farm's bottom line. So I just like your the comments on some of the follow through you've seen with environmental policies and some of the plans by producers from the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, and maybe from Ms. Donnelly as well, because I believe that Canadian ranchers and producers are doing more than is known in the communities with environmental practices, and I just like to have your comments on that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Stanley. That strikes a chord with me personally. Certainly, when we talk about sustainable practices and our environmental farm plan and some of the encouragements we get to apply the best management practices, and those have been very effective. And when we look at our operation, the things that we've been able to take advantage of by having an environmental farm plan and their verified beef production plus system. Those are all good for our marketing, but it's also good for us in our systems. And so by being able to be verified and have a environmental farm plan, we can prove to our consumers that, you know, we are committed to the environment.
Thank you. Sorry, we're out of time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Steinley. We have to work with a hard stop. We can't. They need the room for other committees, so we'll have to stop it here. And I'd like to thank from the Canadian Cattlemen Association, Mr. Dwayne Thompson, and also Ms. Vaughn Jackson, and also from Tamara Inc. Alden Donnelly. Thank you all for participating. And that'll conclude our study for today. And we shall see the rest of the committee on Thursday. Thank you and have a good day. Meeting adjourned.